One fear is that they will be held up at what the military call choke points. One is the Karbala Gap, just south of Baghdad. Special Forces Team 551 is inserted, sets up a hide, and calls in airstrikes to make sure the gap is not closed. These are photographs of the actual hide, deep behind enemy lines. Team 551 remains in place 10 days.
The reconnaissance mission that Team 551 did was absolutely essential because when 3rd Mechanized Infantry Division rolled through the Karbala Gap a few days later, they rolled through. That place was not a choke point, it was not a killing ground, it was just another piece of highway.
U.S. Navy SEALs and Polish commandos seized the oil platforms. British Royal Marines and Special Boat Service take the Faw Peninsula. SAS and U.S. Special Forces ensure that there are no Scud sites in the western half of Iraq. U.S. 173rd Airborne Brigade parachutes onto Iraqi airfield H-3 and secures it. Waiting on the ground are U.S. Special Forces operatives. In the north, the unseen war also begins. The key will be the battles along the Green Line, separating Kurdish territory from the Iraqi forces stationed north of Baghdad. Special operation teams and Peshmerga must pin them down, and then try to open the way to the city of Kirkuk and the northern oil fields. One critical battle is fought at the Debecka Pass. The Special Operations Forces in northern Iraq have a forward operating base, or FOB, which is in overall command. The FOB controls 3 Special Forces Company headquarters, known as Operational Detachment Bravos, or ODBs. Each ODB controls 4 to 6 teams, 10 to 12-man detachments, called Operational Detachment Alphas, or ODAs, the famous A-teams. On April 4th, 2003, 4 days after the start of the campaign, U.S. Special Forces in northern Iraq launch Operation Northern Safari. ODB 390 from 3rd Group and 4 of its A-teams are assigned the mission, plus ODA 044 from 10th Group. These teams would soon find themselves engaged in a bitter, bloody struggle with some of Saddam's elite armored divisions. What happens next will fundamentally redefine the future operational use of special forces in combat. Northern Iraq, 2003. U.S. Special Forces A-teams spearhead Peshmerga units to occupy the western end of a ridge running along the strategically critical Green Line. They aim to pin down Saddam's northern forces, while the main coalition assault in the south races toward Baghdad. More forces will then outflank the Green Line, move east, and strike toward Kirkuk. A small number of camera crews are with the Peshmerga force. April 6th, A-teams go ahead. The Peshmerga follow, ready to attack. The 3rd Battalion was originally assigned to the Western Desert to hunt Scud missiles. It has new and lethal ground mobility vehicles, GMVs. It has trained on the new Javelin anti-tank missile. It also has its own special supply vehicles, War Pigs, so the A-teams will not have to leave their positions to be resupplied. Each A-team can also call in air support. From F-14s and F-A-18s operating off carriers in the eastern Mediterranean, and giant B-52s from RAF Fairford in Britain. This is crucial in what is about to happen. 1700 hours, the A-teams call in B-52 airstrikes to begin the demolition of the Iraqi defenses. 0401 hours the next morning, 2 more B-52s bomb the ridge. 0600, ODAs 391 and 392 link up with their column of 80 Peshmerga fighters. Liaison Special Forces from ODA 044 are also present. They move south toward a crossroad protected by a minefield. Peshmerga forces try to breach an earthen berm ahead of the Iraqi line. The ODAs give supporting fire. The ODAs receive intelligence that an Iraqi armored battalion with tanks and personnel carriers has moved back from the crossroad. At the crossroad, they find an abandoned T-55 tank. This tank will prove crucial in what happens later. The American ODAs breach the berm and move south again toward a highway along the ridge line. The Peshmerga assemble at the crossroad by the abandoned tank. These stills were taken at the crossroads. Special high-level clearance has been necessary to use them for this program. 0940. The two A-teams and their GMVs are exposed. They pull back to a small ridgeline as Iraqi tanks and armored personnel carriers emerge from a morning mist. From the ridge, nicknamed the Alamo, the A-teams call in an airstrike and fire on the advancing tanks and troop carriers with Javelin anti-tank missiles. The enemy halts. At the crossroad, ODA 44 is also engaged with the enemy, using Javelin anti-tank missiles. Shortly before 1000 hours, 2 Navy F-14 Tomcats launch laser-guided bombs intended for the Iraqi tanks. But tragically, the first Tomcat targets the abandoned tank at the crossroad and the Peshmerga column gathered around it. It is devastating. The ODAs on the ridge face a harsh decision. They are locked in a gun battle with Iraqi tanks, but their Peshmerga allies are lying dead and wounded.
The accidental bombing of the Peshmerga at the crossroads could have been a disaster for the battle, because the Special Forces might have thought, okay, we need to pull back and take care of our own.
Instead, the Special Forces teams divide up. Some race back to tend the wounded. The rest continue to take on the Iraqi tanks and infantry.
This was a critical point in the battle. Had the Special Forces turned their backs, they could very well have found that the Iraqis charged at them. These aggressive, these ferocious forces could well have taken the initiative. As it was, they stood their ground, and it was a turning point in the battle.
The Peshmerga column and the press vehicles are burning. Fuel and ordnance are exploding. 17 Peshmerga and a BBC cameraman are killed. 45 men are wounded, including 2 Special Forces soldiers. Troops from ODA 391 tend the wounded. In front of them, the battle continues. The Iraqi T-55s are still in position, close to the crossroads, but behind cover. The rest of the ODAs take out Iraqi tanks and vehicles. They recall the Tomcats back into action and direct them onto the proper target. FA-18 Hornets pick up the attack. 10:40 hours. Most of the wounded have been evacuated. The A-teams are almost out of Javelin missiles. Fortunately, the war pigs arrive with resupplies, just as the Iraqis start to close in. By 1600 hours, the battle is won. To the west, after a similar fierce engagement against Iraqi armor and artillery, other ODAs break the Iraqi forces on the flank. The way south is now open.